My name is Craig Brown. I'm responding to Module 4, Unit 4, Activity 1 about developing a community of learners and a positive classroom climate in response to two videos, an in-class lesson and an online lesson. So in the in-class lesson, the teacher was engaging the kids in a reading activity. And she seemed to be doing quite well with their basic interactions with the kids. She had good rapport with them. She commanded, the space and our attention. And she described this activity. She prepped them for this activity by going over the agreements, which the code of conduct, the goals for this activity, how to use resources to support this activity, and then a step-by-step procedure. So when she was describing the agreements that the classroom code of conduct, she was doing so by asking a question and then having the kids respond by, someone raises their hand and then gives a direct response. And so this, if I were to do the same thing, what I would do is instead of calling on students who raise their hand, I would post the code of conduct on the board and I would do a call and response. That way I know that everyone has at least had some contact with or engaged with what are the agreements before we start. The next is she presented the goals for this activity, and I actually think she had a great goal for this. It was for this reading activity. We read to find the main idea of the story. It's a great goal because it tells you exactly what you need to be doing. It's not so abstract that it's that you wouldn't know how to approach it. I'm reading this, and my purpose is to understand the main idea. She then tried to describe why the main idea is important, and I think that this could have benefited from a little bit more preparation, because there are meaningful things to be said about that. She wasn't really able to articulate a point. If it were me, things I would focus on might be we find the main idea of the story so we can compare it to other things we know, or we find the main idea of the story so we can discuss it with others. And I think with a certain amount of prompting, the kids too would be able to come up with a lot of that. So the next thing that she described is how to use the resources and materials. And she had a great example of using the book itself and the illustrations in the book to be kind of pre-read, get some context for what it is that you're reading. And she also described and made students aware of the dictionary and the iPad, which she had, I believe, given them procedures as to how to use in a previous class. And why you would use them. We find words to understand them, was how it was described. But then she wanted to move on, and there was a girl who raised her hand in front, and she called on the girl, and the girl gave two other interesting ways to interact with the material. One was by reading slower, and the other was asking a buddy. And so here I think she missed an opportunity. If it were me, I would have given that girl a shout out and been like, hey, Susie, that's a great idea. Did everybody hear what Susie said? She said this. Because it's very difficult to hear this girl's response in the first place. So it's useful to rephrase it. But it's also showing that that's exactly the approach that you want to be taking to class. And Susie, or whatever her name is a good example of how to be a student in class. So next she moved on to the step-by-step procedures. And here I think is where some of the problems that were visible in the videotaped activity, they pretty much all stem back to these step-by-step procedures. Some of them were unclear. And like I'll give you, say, 15 minutes or maybe 20 minutes, and sometimes they were too fine-grained and they lacked context. So I think a high-level description which she gave at the very end. You will read through the book to understand the main idea of the book and use the dictionary or iPad to look up words you don't know. That could have been in several places throughout that process to help contextualize all those micro steps. Also, it shouldn't be all described, orally. I feel like this was complex enough that it needed, a worksheet or a checklist or something for them to be able to refer to as they go through the process. But I'd say that the biggest issue, and the one that relates most to this topic, is that there were no descriptions of how to interact with other students in this activity. Actually, it was unclear to me whether this was a group activity, individuals reading, or supposed to be a paired activity. And in the video of the activity itself, the students were doing a little bit of everything. So if it were me, I would make sure that how you interact is clear. We're reading in pairs, maybe. One student is going to look through the pictures and come up with two descriptions of the images, and then the other student is going to read that passage on that page in the book and come up with three words that they don't know or they think their partner might not know, and then they discuss and switch and then read. So this gives them it gives them clear instructions on how to interact and what to do next. But I think more importantly, it also gives them a pretext to work with each other. So in the video, you could see there is the boy who is closest to the camera. And it was clear he didn't know how exactly to start interacting with the task. The girl at the front of his table was reading alone. There was a boy with an iPad next to him who later you find out is supposed to be helping him and is fiddling with the iPad. But there's no instructions on, like, if he's supposed to be helped, then how is he supposed to be helped? Like, what is he supposed to do in order to be helped? And what is the other person supposed to do in order to help him, or vice versa? There isn't any clear description of how to interact. And I think that's important. Knowing what your role is and how to interact with others and having a pretext to do so is important when developing a community of learners. Okay, the second video was of a math teacher teaching acute, obtuse, and right angles and how to use a protractor. And this was an online class. And I thought that this class was great. And the teacher there was a wonderful atmosphere. It felt very participatory. It felt very democratic. And it seemed like there was a real sense of community in this class. And I think that a large part of how she did this comes back to thinking about her lessons from the perspective of the student. She's thinking about what they're thinking and what they're experiencing, rather than thinking about the lesson as a lesson plan per se. And so examples are, in the beginning, she starts with an activity that's a game, and it's a lot like a game that kids would make. She doesn't say, now you're going to name a star in the next 5 minutes. She says, if you can name a star in 5 minutes, you can have that star. That's how kids create games when they interact. Also, when they are collaborating too, I think that she's putting a lot of thought in about how they collaborate. So for instance, with the online tool, the protractor, I think it would be easy to think that the best way to handle that would be to put them in pairs and have them discuss with each other, because there'd probably be a little bit more talking between individuals. But I actually think that that's wrong, and I think that she did it right, which is to have it be a whole class activity. Because really what it is it's a game where you're making guesses against the guesses of other people, and you're all contributing to kind of feel and see who's right based on what other people have guessed. So I don't think that you arrive at that by trying to count how many words people speak to each other. I think that the meaningful interaction there is in the thinking about the structure of the game from the perspective of the kids. And she had them all participate in certain actions together, especially physical movement, which would be really important in the context of online, and then just describe their experience after that. So she had them like move 360 degrees in 90-degree angles. And then they were just kind of free to react to what that is. And in a group, just like on social media or whatever, you've got one girl says, "Oh, I'm going to get dizzy," and so on and so forth. It gets people involved in a kind of community way. So she does this teaching through this literacy related teaching and teaching about angles through a joke. But I think it was really cleverly done. Like, it could have been done in a way which wasn't very effective, but she really understood the nuances of it. So there's a joke where the right angle, the obtuse angle is crying. The right angle says, "Why is the obtuse angle crying?" And the acute angle says, "Because he's never right." And so rather than just explaining the joke, she first kind of explains the words, explains the ideas of double meaning, does a little bit of back and forth with the kids about that. And then when she has the picture up, she's actually asking questions like, what is the right angle saying? Well, you have to be able to identify what the right angle is in order to say that. So she's kind of integrating the learning in the context of this joke. And that led to a really interesting moment where one of the kids expanded on this by saying, "Oh, I think this joke is unfair because the acute angle is also never right." I mean, if I heard that, my head would explode in class. Asking questions and then pausing for students to give them time to think. And then they're raising their hand in the chat, and she's letting the line, expand out. And then she has somebody respond, and then she goes one by one after that and has them, "Do you have something to add?" And you end up with like a community response to questions, which is great. She did a lot to empower them. So part of that is just being incredibly clear and well thought out with the instructions, color coding things, stating things simply. But also it was about getting them to share their thought process. How do you get to 180 degrees? Not just, what is 90 degrees plus 90 degrees? It was, what are two 90-degree angles together? And then asking them how they would go about solving that problem. At the end, she obviously in the past, she has already instructed them on how to get resources to improve and learn more and deal with things you don't understand outside of class. And so she was just able to ask them, and they were able. She said, "Well, how do you find out more, and how do you get more practice to improve?" They're able to just recount that directly to her, which was great. And then also dealing with things that are more kind of social and emotional knowledge. So there was the question of, why is everybody not getting the same homework? And she just goes directly to the question. I think even before, putting out the assignments. And then she's obviously discussed this with them before, so it didn't take a lot of, hemming and hawing, but they were able to articulate why that is the case. And then I think that she's able to do a lot of this based on a very appropriate sense of humility. So towards the beginning, one of the kids wrote to her in the chat that, "Oh, I think your class is really fun." And she didn't respond to that in a way which was like, "Oh, yes, thank you so much. You're such a good boy and so nice for telling me." I mean, to an extent it was that, but actually the point she made was, nobody ever tells me that. And I hear all the time criticism and how I need to improve, but you told me something that made me feel good. You are, which tells the kid that he's empowered. He has the power over the teacher to do something for her, which I think is a really important thing to have. Not just you're a well-behaved boy. And also, there was a point where she mistakenly tried to put a student back on task who was, in fact, commenting in a relevant way in the chat. And the student himself didn't even have to jump up and defend himself. There was just another student who calmly stated, no, actually, what he was responding to was this, and it was relevant. And that student didn't seem at all afraid or concerned that that was going to embarrass or create problems for the teacher. And because it didn't, and it's probably the case that she's demonstrated this many times in the past, that it's okay to question the teacher, and she's able to admit her own mistakes, which I'm sure makes them a lot more comfortable doing the same too. Anyway, I'd like to find things to add, but uh, I don't think I would do as good a job as this teacher. I I think that what I can do best is point out what she did well, and yes, and I guess I'll leave it at that.